Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, a powerful earthquake in Myanmar and Thailand turns buildings to rubble and causes numerous deaths and injuries. What we know and don't know about the military campaign in Yemen that was discussed in the Signal chat, in which Trump officials are touting as highly successful. And we hear from people who entered the country legally but have now been targeted in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown.
And I feel hunted and persecuted. And it seems like the president, the executive, has taken on these law enforcement agencies as his own personal police.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
I love seeing interns succeed. I love seeing them come back and join engagement teams and seeing where they go from there. I get to watch their personal growth. It makes my heart happy.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And Friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. In Southeast Asia today, a major earthquake rocked Myanmar and surrounding countries, collapsing multiple buildings and complicating rescue efforts. As of now, more than 140 people have reportedly been killed across 3 cities in Myanmar, and at least 10 in neighboring Thailand have died. The epicenter of the 7.7 magnitude quake was near Myanmar's second largest city, and was followed by a 6.4 magnitude aftershock. Debbie Edward of Independent Television News has the latest from Bangkok, Thailand.
The man filming shouted a warning, but it took just 3 seconds for the entire skyscraper to collapse. He kept recording as he and his co-workers fled in terror and were engulfed in dust. Across Bangkok, people watched in horror as the building, with a construction crane on top, crumpled to the ground following a massive earthquake. A major rescue operation swung into action, with 90 people trapped in the mound of rubble and twisted metal. The epicenter was in neighbouring Myanmar, where it struck during Friday prayers. This mosque caved in on the worshippers inside. A group of monks, cowering outside the ruins of their temple, watched as another building nearby collapsed. At Mandalay Airport, passengers and staff crouched in fear on the tarmac as the tremors continued. In the Burmese capital, the General Hospital was quickly overwhelmed. The sounds of heart monitors and screams of pain, punctuating an air of chaos in a mass casualty area. For the past 4 years, Myanmar has been gripped in a bloody civil war, and now nature has inflicted a disaster on its people. The country is largely cut off from the world, and communications inside are restricted. So the scale of loss they are facing is still unknown.
We will know the scale of the damage as we move forward, but we can imagine, as our colleague already said, that the impact will be quite significant.
The quake hit at around 1 p.m. local time and was so powerful it reached the Thai capital hundreds of miles away, causing its many high-rise buildings to sway, some rooftop pools producing crashing waves like the ocean, while others created cascading waterfalls. In a city not used to earthquakes, panic took hold and crowds fled for the safety of the outdoors. Hospital patients were evacuated onto a road, while a restaurant became a safe haven for these babies from a neonatal unit. Shocks were felt across the entire region, including southern China, where falling debris had people running for their lives. A state of emergency has been declared in Myanmar and in Thailand, where the Prime Minister visited the scene of the construction site collapse. The specialist teams brought in for this complex search and rescue operation must be daunted by the task that faces them. The giant shards of concrete in which they hope to find signs of life. Debbie Edward, ITV News.
The day's other headlines start in Lebanon, where Israel struck the capital, Beirut, for the first time since a ceasefire with Hezbollah took effect last November. The Israeli army says its strike hit a Hezbollah drone facility in an area considered a stronghold for the militant group. That strike drew a massive emergency response. Israeli officials said the attack was retaliation for a rocket fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel, which Hezbollah has denied.
For any attempt to harm our northern towns, the roofs of the houses in southern Beirut will tremble. I'm sending a clear message to the Lebanese government. If you don't enforce the ceasefire, we will.
Though this was the first Israeli attack on Beirut since last year, the Israeli army has struck targets in southern Lebanon almost daily since the ceasefire took effect. Here at home, the U.S. State Department told Congress today that it intends to effectively shut down USAID. And late this afternoon, a federal appeals court allowed them to do so, lifting a lower court order that blocked Elon Musk's DOGE team from making cuts to the independent foreign aid agency. In a memo sent to staff today, USAID's new chief said that all positions not required by law will be eliminated in 2 waves, in July and in September. The State Department will absorb what remains of a dramatic reorganization. Utah has become the first state to ban fluoride in public drinking water. That's despite opposition from dentists and public health experts who say fluoride strengthens teeth and reduces cavities, the most common chronic disease in children. Utah's ban starts in May and echoes the skepticism of new HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who joined the governor of West Virginia today to tout that state's first-in-the-nation ban on certain synthetic food dyes. Some public health advocates cite research that links certain bright-colored food dyes to neurobehavioral problems in some children, like ADHD. President Trump says he wants to wipe out what he calls divisive narratives and improper ideology at the Smithsonian Institution. The president signed an executive order late yesterday putting Vice President J.D. Vance in charge of the effort. The order singled out the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as the still-developing Women's History Museum. Mr. Trump claims there's been an effort to rewrite history based on what he says is ideology rather than truth. The Smithsonian consists of 21 museums and the National Zoo. It's the largest museum, education, and research complex in the world. And new data today that showed worsening inflation led to a wipeout on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost more than 700 points, while the sell-off hit the NASDAQ especially hard, dropping nearly 3%. The S&P 500 dropped 2%, capping the worst trading day in almost 3 weeks. Still to come on the NewsHour, the security vulnerabilities of government officials using the Signal messaging app. David Brooks and Ruth Marcus weigh in on the week's political headlines. And a new book from 2 political scientists sharply criticizes the government response to the COVID pandemic.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President Trump today again made clear his desire to take over Greenland, which is a self-governed part of Denmark. Vice President Vance, along with his wife, and the president's national security advisor traveled to the American military base there today to again make their case, which has enraged the governments of Greenland and Denmark and driven another wedge between the U.S. and Europe. Here's Stephanie Sy.
The trip began on a frigid tarmac. J.D. Vance and the Second Lady Usha Vance whisked away to a U.S. military base in Greenland's remote northwest.
It's cold as here.
Patuxent Space Base supports U.S. missile defense and space surveillance and was the Vances' only stop. Today, the vice president emphasized benefits of what he called a partnership.
And if the people of Greenland were willing to partner with the United States, and I think that they ultimately will partner with the United States, we could make them much more secure, we could do a lot more protection, and I think they'd fare a lot better economically as well.
What was supposed to be a cultural visit by the vice president, complete with a dog sled race, was in the end heavily scaled back. A cold shoulder, if you will.
We are not for sale.
Amid widespread protests from everyday Greenlanders like Casper Frank Moller, a tour operator in the capital Nuuk.
Everybody's welcome, also the Americans, also Trump, but it needs to be on the circumstance of the Greenlanders that they will accept us as a sovereign state, as Greenland becoming independent, being their own country.
Denmark's prime minister reiterated her country's position.
We would really like to work together with the Americans on defense and security. We want that in Ukraine, we want that in Europe, and of course we also want that when it comes to the High North. But Greenland belongs to the Greenlandic people.
But the vice president made the case that Denmark has treated Greenlanders as second-class citizens.
Our message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change.
In Washington today, President Trump doubled down on his commitment to gain the territory.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't.
The Trump administration's moves have become a rallying cry for a unified front in Greenland, which today announced a coalition government of its four main political parties. Jens Frederik Nielsen, the new prime minister, said he hopes to see dialogue between Greenland and the U.S. going forward.
The first thing we do is engage in dialogue with our closest allies. Now we have a government that needs to get to work, and it will start immediately.
From Europe, some pointed words of support. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen congratulated Greenland on the coalition government, writing, "You deserve partners who respect you and treat you as equals." Vance's visit highlights the strategic importance of Greenland and the wider Arctic. U.S. adversaries, including Russia, are watching developments closely. Yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin weighed in.
It is deeply mistaken to believe that these are some kind of extravagant talks of the new American administration. Nothing of the sort. We are talking about serious plans on the American side regarding Greenland.
And while the Russians are augmenting forces in the Arctic in response to the Americans, it's the U.S. face-off with a long-held NATO ally, Denmark, that is alarming many. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
Overnight, the U.S. launched what analysts are describing as one of the largest bombing missions in Yemen in years, targeting what the U.S. says are Houthi leaders and terrorist infrastructure. The Trump administration's campaign against Yemen has been going on for about 2 weeks now, but the military action has been overshadowed by the messages sent by the national security officials in the commercial messaging app Signal leading up to and after the strikes. Nick Schifrin is here to update us. Nick, it's great to see you. So, Looking at the policy, what is the military currently bombing, and how is that different from the Biden administration?
Yeah, the Trump administration has launched many missile strikes and jet and drone sorties to target what the U.S. identifies as Houthi leaders, their air defense, and weapons manufacturing and storage. One of the differences with the Biden administration's approach, according to military officials, is delegating authorities down to the commanders, allowing them more leeway on the timing and the targets. And that is the other difference. The Trump campaign has expanded the targets to include Houthi leaders and Houthi technical experts, what the military would call the Houthis network, says retired Admiral Kevin Donegan, the former commander of U.S. Navy Middle East.
And it includes leadership, but not in the sense that everyone with the last name of Houthis would necessarily be targeted. It would be leadership of those that are doing training, teaching, of those that have the understanding of how to employ these weapons, that put them together and build them. And Nick, I talked about it being very similar to what we did against Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula right here in Yemen.
Other former U.S. officials, Jeff, have told me that the U.S. did not have the intelligence going into this campaign to target all of the Houthi leaders. But as the bombs start falling, those leaders start moving, they start communicating, creating more intelligence. As for the goal of this campaign, now remember how this started. Houthi attacks forced commercial shipping lanes, and you see those lanes moving around the world right there, commercial shippers to change their routes, including all the way around Africa. That drove up costs. That reduced exports. It has been a long-standing U.S. goal to keep shipping lanes open, says Donegan, who spent decades in the military.
We as a country have had a stated objective in our national security strategy for every administration that I served under that said it's in our national interest to keep the sea lanes open for the flow of commerce.
So, Nick, do analysts believe that this effort can work where previous efforts have failed?
It's a key question. The Saudis launched 7 years of airstrikes against the Houthis. The Biden administration and a coalition launched airstrikes against the Houthis last year, as have the Israelis. The Houthis are still in Yemen. The Trump administration airstrikes are extensive. Take a look at this map. These are the sites bombed in just the last 4 days. You see the yellow dots right there, according to the Independent Live Universal Awareness Map. The Houthis have admitted some 70 fatalities since these airstrikes began. But, Jeff, analysts say that they can regroup unless the air campaign is combined with a strategy to dislodge Houthis from the land they control, says Mohammed al-Basha, an analyst who founded the Independent Basha Report.
Airstrikes alone, without supporting the ground forces, the Yemeni ground forces right now with regional backing, the Houthis, even if they're degraded to the highest level possible, airstrikes will do, they will be able to regroup. They've been surviving airstrikes since 2004.
But officials have made it clear, Jeff, they are not trying to execute some kind of regime change in this part of Yemen. So Basha recommends a regional approach and the U.S. military trying very hard to avoid civilian casualties.
It needs to avoid targeting civilian infrastructure. It needs to avoid giving the Houthis any mean or tools to use as propaganda that the airstrikes are killing civilians. And the most important thing after that is regional powers and the anti-Houthi coalition in Yemen need to sit down and figure out what's the Yemen policy, what's the day after.
One other aspect of this, Jeff, Iran. Iran sends the Houthis anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, long-range drones. The military sent me a statement today, quote, while the Houthis still do maintain capability, it's largely because of the nearly 10 years of support provided by Iran. President Trump has made it clear he will hold Iran responsible for any Houthi attacks on U.S. ships in the Red Sea. And tonight there are new U.S. heavy bombers on an island in the Indian Ocean, a clear message to Iran.
Yeah, indeed. Lastly, Nick, we mentioned those signal messages. What do those messages actually reveal, substantively?
About this campaign, yeah. Vice President Vance initially opposed the campaign, saying it would support Europe more than the U.S. He also was worried about the Houthis targeting Saudi oil facilities. They also revealed debate about the operation's goals. The vice president made it clear that President Trump wanted the goal to be to send a message, to project power. But Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said that the goal should strictly be to restore navigation, prevent the Houthis from attacking U.S. assets. Jeff, and those are the goals that the U.S. is using publicly right now.
Nick Schifferner, thanks to you as always.
Thank you.
Well, that Signal group chat has also raised many questions over just how secure such messaging apps are and the risks if government officials use them on their personal devices. Our Lisa Desjardins has more.
That's right, Jeff. The Signal chat among cabinet members has highlighted a cybersecurity concern, the growing use of personal phones and downloaded apps by public officials who handle sensitive information. Attorney General Pam Bondi has dismissed calls for a criminal investigation into the Signal conversation. She says the app is secure. Joining me now to discuss is Thomas Rid, professor of strategic studies at Johns Hopkins University. Thomas, thanks for joining us. Signal is an app that many folks may know is used for texting and messaging. You just type into your phone like other ones, but can you explain why it's become the go-to app for people handling sensitive conversations?
Signal is the most secure messaging app that we have because it is end-to-end encrypted. So that means there's effectively a tunnel of encryption going from your phone all the way to my phone, should we talk via Signal or text via Signal. And that means anybody listening in between, that could be Signal, that could be AT&T, or somebody who owns a Wi-Fi network, they will not be able to see our text messages, end-to-end encrypted.
So then let's go to what the Attorney General is saying. Here are her words last night on Fox News.
I think Signal's a very safe way to communicate. I don't think foreign adversaries are able to hack Signal, as far as I know.
That's the question. Are foreign adversaries able to hack into Signal?
I think it's important here to be very specific. Technically, the Attorney General is correct that so far we have no precedent of an adversary ever hacking into Signal, the platform, as far as I'm aware of. However, Signal is sitting on your phone, on just commercially available phones like iPhones and Android devices. We have many examples of these phones getting hacked. And of course, we should assume that high-value targets, like, for example, the Vice President or the Secretary of Defense or the National Security Advisor, that their phones are targeted by some of the most capable adversaries. So the phones are vulnerable. Imagine literally somebody looking over my shoulder at my phone. They can see what's in it and what I'm texting on Signal, and so can somebody remotely reading my screen. That does not mean Signal has been compromised. It means the phone has been compromised, and you can look inside the tunnel at the opening of the tunnel.
Which foreign adversaries are the most likely to be doing this?
That, of course, is an invitation to speculate, but high up on the list would be China, Russia, Iran, but many others as well.
Now, in 2023, the Department of Defense sent out a memo telling employees that Signal should not be used for information that wasn't already public. It wrote that mobile apps may contain malware and have vulnerabilities, and also this is possible without the user's consent or knowledge. This goes to what you're saying about people getting onto phones, foreign adversaries. But I want to ask you, do you have a sense of how seriously the federal government structure, employees in the federal government have been taking that warning about Signal? Is it common for people to use it, or do you feel like there's a culture of not using those apps?
I mean, let's be very specific. Signal, for most normal people, for conversations and phone calls that are confidential, that are just private. We call it private in public life. Signal is the best you can do. However, the government, of course, has more secure systems available for classified information, like when you're planning a military operation. So Signal should not be used very clearly for any classified information because it doesn't even reside in a classified environment. So while it is the safest you can do as a commercial, private person, and indeed as a government employee outside of the classified system, it is not okay to use it for classified content. That is a fundamental difference that I think we should be very clear about.
Something else about Signal is that it's designed so that messages can disappear very quickly, an hour after they're written, if the users choose to do it that way. Can you help us with how that overlaps, or if that's a problem with federal records law, which requires these conversations to be kept?
Federal records law indeed requires information to be kept and archived for future use. And of course, if you set your disappearance time to something quite short, 1 minute, 5 minutes, or even just a day, it will be very hard to keep track because messages just disappear. I'm not sure there's a process in place for capturing signal traffic for archival purposes.
Thomas Rid, thank you for giving us some answers. Still more questions out there. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
President Trump promised the largest mass deportation effort in the country's history. And as the Homeland Security Department works to deport more people, immigrants with legal status or no criminal history are also being detained and deported. We talked with 3 people affected by the changes: a Canadian who tried to renew her visa, the husband of a Peruvian immigrant who's being detained in Louisiana, and a graduate student currently being targeted for deportation. Here's what they told us.
My name is Jasmine Mooney, and I am from Canada.
My name is Mamadou Tall. I'm from the UK and the Gambia, and I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Africana Studies at Cornell.
Bradley Bartel. I live in central Wisconsin. Sylvia Munoz, she was detained February 15th, roughly 1 p.m. or so. We were coming back from our honeymoon in Puerto Rico. The agents at the airport in San Juan were asking everybody if they were American citizens or not. That's when they pulled her to the side, starting asking questions like, hey, this is my wife of American citizen, and, you know, do you have this form on you? Do you have this form on you? And no, we didn't.
I was detained on March 3rd. I was in detention for a total of 12 days before they released me. Everything in that place is meant to break you. From being put in cells that are absolutely freezing cold with no blankets. The first 48 hours I slept on the mat on concrete with no blankets, no pillows. They gave me this aluminum foil thing that you wrap around your body like a dead body.
First, we filed injunction against the Trump administration. Then, law enforcement agencies are seen at my residence. Then my counsel received an email that I am to surrender to ICE custody, and then my visa is revoked.
They gave us a ICE lookup number to look her up in the system, and she didn't even turn up in the system for like a week, so I didn't know where she was, didn't have any way to contact her, nothing, didn't know anything. So that part was pretty terrible.
1, they break you down when you are in there. 2, they scare you. They try and scare you. No one wants to stand up for them. People are scared to talk about this because they think they're going to be banned for life or that they're never going to be able to travel. And this everything is a scare tactic. They do not want this getting out.
What we're seeing now is a worrying trend, first and foremost, of people being essentially abducted and kidnapped throughout the country. Young scholars, graduate students, graduates are being abducted and kidnapped and taken to unknown locations. I've not been convicted of a crime, alleged of any crime, or arrested. I've only expressed my what should be First Amendment protected activity.
Especially with no criminal history and having come here being documented, I believe that kind of thing should be forgiven as it has in the past. Historically, people that have overstayed their visa, that kind of thing has been forgiven by the courts. One person asked me if she were to be deported, what would I do? And I'd seriously be considering becoming a Peruvian citizen and just leaving America.
I'm not going to let it jade me because I love America still. I love my friends there. I just am still extremely confused about what is actually happening and these processes, and it does not have to be this way. There has to be a better system.
I feel hunted and persecuted, and it seems like the president, the executive, has taken on these law enforcement agencies as his own personal police. What Trump administration is doing via the executive orders and by these actions is sending a clear message. If you are in this country and you are in a precarious visa situation, you can be deported. Not for any crime, not for any action that's illegal, but purely based on what you say and whether that is critical of the US foreign policy or the state of Israel.
Laura Barón Lopez has been following their stories and the Trump administration's efforts to restrict legal immigration and joins us now. So, Laura, first, our thanks to you and the team for bringing us those stories. It was incredible. So, those 3 people that you spoke with, where are they now?
Yeah, great work to our producers there as well. And so Momodou is, his location is unknown because he is trying to avoid ICE detention. Jasmine Mooney is back in Canada facing a 5-year ban to the United States. And Bradley Bartell is essentially waiting for his wife's day in court. He voted for President Trump and said that despite all of this, he does not regret that vote.
This week, the Trump administration also stepped up their efforts to strip some students of legal status. They claim that some of these people are sympathetic to terrorist groups like Hamas. And of course, there's that case of Mahmoud Khalil. There was a hearing today. What's the latest?
There was a hearing, and we should remind our viewers that Mahmoud Khalil is a green card holder, Columbia student, and a pro-Palestinian activist. So that hearing today was about jurisdiction. Jeff, the administration wants the jurisdiction to be in Louisiana, where Khalil is currently being held, and it's a more favorable court for the Trump administration. His lawyers want the case to be in New Jersey, and they said that the administration is trying to delay tactics. Khalil's wife was present in the courtroom today, and she's pregnant and due to give birth next month. I spoke to Khalil's lawyer, Baher Azmi, who said that it's a ticking clock to get Khalil out, that Khalil is anxious because he's worried about missing the birth of his child. And they said that the longer that Khalil is in detention, they're worried that it'll have a chilling effect on other immigrants and their political speech.
And there's the Turkish national, Rumeysa Öztürk. She was arrested in Massachusetts this past week. She's also being detained, so far as we know, in Louisiana. What more can you tell us about her case?
That's right. There was shocking video that surfaced this week, and she's a PhD student at Tufts University here on a student visa. She was arrested near her apartment by federal agents, and she can be heard screaming in the video. Now, the government moved her to that Louisiana detention center, despite the fact that a judge ordered them not to move her out of state without giving notice. And while overseas, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked about these arrests, and he said that he has revoked more than 300 student visas, and he's revoking them daily.
Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa. We gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses.
Rubio is revoking these visas under an obscure immigration provision that says that if he decides that a person is having an adverse foreign policy effect, that he can take away their visa or green card holder. Now, we should say that Khalil and Öztürk have not been charged with any crime.
I know you've been talking to immigration lawyers about all of this. What are they telling you?
So a longtime immigration lawyer that I spoke to said that they believe that the end goal here is to essentially scare enough legal immigrants to self-deport, to drive up those deportation numbers that the president wants. Now, in cases like Öztürk's, the Tufts student who was arrested in the street, some immigration lawyers say that Trey Poppet and I talked to said that federal agents have to produce a warrant when they're attempting to arrest you, that the person being arrested doesn't necessarily have to answer any questions, but they're advised not to resist arrest. Now, earlier, I also spoke to Jennifer Babai. She is the legal services director with Los Americas, and I began by asking her what she's been hearing from families, especially parents that are fearful that they could be detained and separated from their children.
What we're advising these individuals is to prepare legal documents so that there is a legal custodian who can come in and take care of their children in the short term should they be detained. That's rightfully one of the scariest scenarios to think about, and it's our job to get folks sort of ready to contemplate what will happen if that occurs. The questions I also get are, is it safe for us to come to your office? Is it safe for me to report a crime to the police? Is it safe for my children to go to school? Can I still go to church? If I go to church and I don't have my ID on me, can I be arrested? The community is afraid and also at the same time trying to understand how to be law-abiding.
If an immigrant is stopped by ICE, what rights do they have?
So our Fourth and Fifth Amendments enshrined in the Constitution protect everyone who's in U.S. territory. And so part of Las Americas' work and the work of our partners is walking folks through those kinds of scenarios on how do you determine if you are under arrest, and what are your rights and privileges depending on where you are. The safest and the place that you're most protected is always when you are at home or somewhere that's a private premises with a closed door. If an officer shows up at your door, you are allowed to ask to see a warrant. And if there is a judicial warrant, then at that point, we walk folks through the fact that they are required under law to open the door and to allow for an inspection.
If someone is adjusting their immigration status, are you advising that they not leave the U.S. at this time?
In general, we are receiving that question by a multitude of clients. People are very nervous, even once they have adjusted status. I have folks who have been a lawful permanent resident for more than 5 years, and they have the same question. Can I leave? Can I visit my family in Mexico? Can I go on vacation with my children? In each scenario, we walk folks through, these are your rights. And the rights, of course, of a lawful permanent resident is that you can travel within limitations and within a certain timeline. But we also have to share with folks the patterns we're seeing. There are many individuals that have been reported in the news who are green card holders who have been detained because of exercising their First Amendment rights. And it's my job as an attorney to advise folks of the risks. But at the end of the day, we don't make those decisions for them. We inform folks, and then it's up to them to weigh the risks, weigh the benefits, and make that decision for themselves.
Jennifer Babai of Las Americas, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
From Trump officials sharing sensitive information on a commercial app to Donald Trump's bid for Greenland, it's time now for Brooks and Marcus. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Ruth Marcus, a longtime columnist formerly of The Washington Post. Jonathan Capehart is away this evening. It's great to have you both here. Lots of news to discuss this week, starting, David, of course, with the controversy over those secret details of pending military strikes in Yemen that were posted on that unsecure group chat that mistakenly included our friend, journalist Jeffrey Goldberg. We've had a few days now to digest this. What stands out to you as the consequences?
Yeah, I've spiraled. When I first saw Jeff's story, I just thought mind-boggling incompetence, like something I've never seen before. And it just seemed like, and I've been saying for weeks, the Democrats should talk about nothing but Trump incompetence. But then it got uglier. I was at the gym, believe it or not, when I watched Pete Hegseth come off an airplane and make his first comment, attacking Jeff. But just mostly it was an aggressive form of bald-faced lying that tells you a lot about a guy. It was obvious they were caught with a screw-up. A normal human being, I really think 99% of human beings said, we messed up, we're going to fix this, we messed up. But not the Trump administration. They went on a vicious attack of character assassination, of ad hominem, of all the ugliest things it's possible to dredge up, and that was their universal instinct. And so I found it incredibly ugly as the story went on.
Ruth, what about that? I mean, it's characteristic of a White House that never admits wrongdoing. What do you make of the way that they've answered this national security scandal with a fiercely political argument?
Well, surprise. I think this is I thought when this first broke, I thought this is an incredible screw-up and a great story. And by the way, when he came to the Washington Post as a summer intern, I was Jeffrey Goldberg's big buddy, professional partner. So I would like to say I get all the credit or the blame for whoever he turned out to be. But I think this is one of these sticky moments for an administration. We saw it when Bush said, heck of a job, Brownie, when we all knew that they were messing up with Katrina. We all saw it when the Biden administration messed up the exit from Afghanistan. This is one of those moments that's actually bigger than the moment itself, because, first of all, anybody can understand, anybody at the gym understands you do not treat operational details in this insecure way. They can draw distinctions all they want about whether information was classified or not. Everybody knows this was bungled. Number two, it just illustrates what we also all knew, those of us who are honest with ourselves, which is this crew, and I will start with the Fox News host who was tapped to be the defense secretary, is not ready for prime time. If they were ready for prime time, they would not be discussing secrets like this on an open channel. And finally, the counterpunching. You can get away with a lot. We've all made mistakes, and some of us who've over the years have learned even to apologize for them. If they had just said, we messed up and moved on, I think they would have served themselves better than doing what they've done now, which is to attack Jeffrey Goldberg, who was the only responsible participant in this whole event. And people are not going to treat this is going to be remembered as a bad moment for this administration.
And David, there's also the substance of what was said on this chat. I mean, the Trump administration has signaled that the transatlantic alliance as we know it is over, at least as compared to the last 80 years of history. But in private, on this chat, what we saw from J.D. Vance, he says, I just hate bailing Europe out again. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, described Europe as freeloading in the chat. He calls the continent pathetic. What does that lay bare, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah, this is our level of foreign policy thinking. Like, oh, we don't like those guys. Basically, you've got an administration, and these guys, down to the ground, they divide everything into hard and soft. And they think Putin is hard and Europe is soft. They think universities are soft and they're hard. And so are you masculine or not? And they code Europe as soft, which is ridiculous. Europe is a diverse country with a lot of hard people and soft people. But this is part of not only one screw-up. We've had 2 months or 50 days, wherever we are, of a comprehensive weakening of our security apparatus. They're diverting FBI agents away from terrorism. They're firing people who are now being recruited, I've read, by Chinese and Russian agents to see if the former U.S. employees. They're gutting the Nuclear Security Agency. They're gutting the security clearances. So this is a comprehensive assault that will make America less safe.
Meantime, let's talk about Greenland, because as we reported earlier this evening, the vice president, he led a delegation there, and it was reflective of President Trump's desire to control this semi-autonomous Danish territory. What do you make of President Trump threatening territorial expansion in the Western Hemisphere, trying to annex Greenland? How does that contrast with his America First ideology and his rhetoric?
America only. It's not just America First, it's America only. It's the toddler who says, I see that, I want it, give it to me. It could be Greenland, it could be Canada, it could be the Panama Canal back. Whatever he wants, he's going to get, as if there isn't what we thought was an international rules-based order. And just to amplify what David was saying, though I do want to say feminine is not necessarily bad.
I did,
So,
yeah. I was trying to talk in their voice.
There.
Yeah,
yes,
okay. Ruth
I
is
will
gonna
take
beat
it
me
as
up after.
I am not going to beat you up, because that would be not feminine of me. But I used to ask during the first Trump administration, when I would see foreign policy experts, about how reparable the damage was. And I thought, and they would say it was irreparable, and I would say, well, maybe we can fix it. And I thought President Biden did a very good job of knitting back together alliances that had been terribly frayed. When I see the way President Trump is talking about Greenland, I must have it, or the way he and others are talking about European allies, they're freeloaders, or the way he talks about the 51st state, I think we are not going to be able to put this broken system back together once he's gone. And I think that is a very scary moment.
Do you see a through line here? I mean, if you look at his America First rhetoric and now this expansionist rhetoric, it makes sense of it for us.
Yeah, some of it is, I think what Ruth said, it's just a kid wanting things. But if there's a through line, I guess he has some thing in his head. Well, first, he's delusional if he thinks the Greenlanders want to be Americans. And if some big Donald Trump comes and say, I want you to join our country, what country on earth is going to say, oh, okay, we'll do that? But the through line, if I can think of it, is he really likes the late 19th century. And this was an era of ugly American imperialism. And so I think we had territorial expansion, Philippines and all over all this stuff, and it was not a good moment in American history, but he somehow wants to do it all over again. And so he has this thing for McKinley, but if you go back, Spanish-Mexican War, all this stuff was just a dark moment, and I think it's what he likes.
The world might have worked that way then. It does not work that way now. It needs to work through if it's going to work, it needs to work through alliances of people who treat their allies with respect, and they can save the masculinity for their enemies.
Lastly, Ruth, it's great to have you here. After an impressive and impactful career at the Washington Post, you decided to step down. Help us understand why.
Well, first I want to say that I'm really grateful to be here at the NewsHour. And the reason is after I decided to resign after 40 days, 6 months, and 6 days, but who's counting?
40 years.
40 years, sorry, 40 years. Yes, thank you. I had, among other comments, a lot of people from the who were viewers of the NewsHour saying, we hope we'll see you there. So I'm very grateful that you're having me, even though I'm kind of professionally unhoused for the moment. I had to resign because I could no longer tell my readers that I was able to write what I wanted about the things that I thought were most important to say. And what happened was, back in October, when Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, decided not to run the already drafted endorsement of Kamala Harris and not to run presidential endorsements later, I disagreed with that decision, and I wrote a column expressing my, I thought, polite disagreement with that decision, and it ran. When Jeff Bezos decided that he was going to shift the opinion section more broadly in a way to limit dissent, as David pointed out on this segment when Jonathan was here, I also wrote a column, and that column, I had to write it because it was what I believed. I had written the previous column. That column didn't run. And when that column didn't run, I knew that my time at the Post had come to an end because I could no longer write what I wanted to say.
Well, we are glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Ruth Marcus, David Brooks, thanks so much, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Five years ago, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID-19 a pandemic, and that launched widespread shutdowns, mandates for masks and vaccines, and had an enormous social and economic impact. William Brangham speaks with the authors of a new book that's sharply critical of how the U.S. responded to the crisis.
That new book is called In COVID's Wake: How Our Politics Failed Us. And it looks back at how critical American institutions, the government, academia, and the press among them, performed during the pandemic, and how their response inflamed distrust, cracked down on dissent, and cost the country tremendously. Its authors are two political scientists from Princeton University, Stephen Macedo and Francis Lee, and they join us now. Welcome to you both. One of the main themes of this book, as it seems to me, is that in the early crazy days of this pandemic, as our leaders were debating lockdowns, how to respond, that any dissent over or real debate about the costs and benefits of those actions was squelched.
Well, it's interesting. In March 2020, as the lockdowns were being enacted in the United States and across many Western countries, there were dissenters who spoke up in March. Some very well-known people warned that these measures were unlikely to be successful and would be very costly. And then a consensus seemed to develop in April and May that the kinds of strategies enacted by the Chinese and that had been implemented in Italy, national lockdown, and across much of the United States, that was the correct strategy, that everyone needed to be on board for it, that there needed to be a sense of vital unity, that government, the academy, science, journalism, all needed to pull together, and that this was what we were going to do, and that this is what we needed to do. And indeed, at that point, voices of dissent became scarce. Social media companies began removing some postings that were at odds with government messaging, and dissent dwindled over the summer and into the fall.
Francis, one of the things that was a real revelation to me was how you document in the book that prior to COVID, that there was a good deal of analysis done about what happens if a respiratory virus does emerge. And the consensus, or some version of a consensus, was that lockdowns are not that effective and that they would cost society enormously.
Yes, there had been a tremendous amount of work planning for what to do when the next pandemic arrived. And we took measures in the early going of the pandemic that were at odds with the recommendations. They had been recommended against in some cases. There was a World Health Organization report from November 2019 that looked at what was known about all the proposed non-pharmaceutical interventions.
This is masks, shutdowns, isolation, testing, tracing, et cetera.
Business closures, school closures, looked at what was known about the effectiveness of each of those measures. And across the board, the report states that the evidence base for the effectiveness of each of them was poor. And so it's so striking that then we get 6 months later and those measures are being employed all around the world with policymakers saying that they're following the science. And of course, it's quite obvious that all of those measures have tremendous costs. So as policymakers are weighing their alternatives, there's uncertain benefits, but certain costs.
I mean, there's other thing in those pre-COVID pandemic plans that's relevant to this question, which is those plans warn that government officials, public officials, will be tempted to adopt these measures, these stringent lockdown measures, to show that they're in charge. To
say, hey, we got this.
Yes, exactly, to take control. And those pre-COVID plans are emphatic in advising experts and public health officials to be frank with the public about the thin evidentiary basis for them and the certainty of costs. So that was ignored. Then, of course, there was the World Health Organization mission that went to China, came back after spending a week there, and endorsed the Chinese strategy of lockdowns without qualification, and said that the entire world should follow this path of strict lockdowns to suppress the virus. There was a prediction that came based on mathematical models out of Imperial College London that predicted 2.2 million deaths in the United States by August 2020 if we didn't implement these suite of measures. That led to a kind of panic, I think, and a failure to consider rationally the costs of these measures and the likelihood of their success.
There are a lot of public health experts who look at our experience and say, both in the heat of the moment and in what we've subsequently learned, that keeping people apart, that social distancing initially was a critical part of protecting people. And I wonder what's your take on that?
Well, that was a theory that if we could keep people apart, that we could buy time before vaccines became available. But it had not been tried on any large scale. And I think what was being overlooked during that planning was the large share of the workforce that would have to continue on the job regardless.
The so-called essential workers.
Essential workers is about a third of the workforce who had to continue doing their jobs in person all through the lockdowns. And so the virus has to continue to spread under those conditions.
When you look at how different states reacted here in the U.S., we did see wildly different responses, some employing very strict policies, others being a little looser. What does the evidence show about how those states worked out?
There were lockdowns across the U.S. 43 governors issued stay-at-home orders. Where you began to see the divergence in policy across the U.S. is in the reopening process. Democratic states stayed locked down for 2.5 times as long as Republican states. Even as Democratic states began to reopen, they still maintained more restrictions than Republican states. But when you look at cumulative COVID mortality at the time the vaccine rollout started, there's no difference between states that pursued more stringent COVID containment policies and states that were more lax. We can't conclude from this that means these measures don't work, but it means that there's still a lack of evidence that they do work.
Especially in light of what we now know as the psychological, economic, academic cost for children, for people, for businesses all over this country.
And also fiscal costs, the amount of borrowing that was necessary to finance the shutdowns. It's roughly equivalent as a share of GDP to what we spent on the New Deal and the 2009 financial rescue combined.
Does your authorship of this book help you give us a sense of how we ought to do things differently if and when, most likely when, the next pandemic comes?
Yes, I would say so. I think we need to make sure that we're open to dissent and that we're open to dissent when it comes from the other side. One of the things that we found is that the pandemic became very polarized. Democratic states were on one side, Republican states were on the other side. We should have been more open to criticisms that were associated with the other side. That, I think, applies to science, because science became politicized, journalism, fortunately, and I think even universities to some extent have been reluctant to ask some hard questions about our COVID experience because of the partisan inflection of some of these issues.
There are so many other elements in this book: social media, free speech, as you're saying, the debate over masks. Can't get to those all here. I want to thank you both so much. The book is called In COVID's Wake: How Our Politics Failed Us. Frances Lee, Stephen Macedo, thank you both so much.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.
And there's a lot more online, including the latest episode of our digital program, PBS News Weekly, which looks at the new tariffs announced by the president and much more. That's on our YouTube page. And you won't want to miss Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight here on PBS. It has been a busy few days of news, to say the least, for moderator Jeffrey Goldberg. And he joins us now with a preview of what to expect tonight on the program.
Thanks, Jeff. Tonight on Washington Week, my all-star panel and I will explore the legal, political, and national security consequences of the Signal group chat read around the world. That's tonight on Washington Week.
And on PBS News Weekend tomorrow, the little-known history of women lighthouse keepers who saved countless lives at sea. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us, and have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.